So I want you to just imagine for a second that you are boiling an egg.
Okay. Like right now.
Yeah, right now. You are in your kitchen,
Yeah.
and you're using the exact same pot, the exact same stove, and the exact same amount of water that you used, say, 40 years ago.
All right. I've got the visual, same setup.
Right. Completely identical setup. But here is the catch.
Yeah.
You are aiming for that very specific, perfect level of doneness you've preferred your entire life.
Yeah.
Right. But suddenly, the math just doesn't work anymore.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning it takes you a full minute longer to cook today than it did back then.
Wait, really? A whole minute?
A whole extra minute.
Yeah.
So here is a rather strange question for you to ponder as we start this deep dive today.
Yeah.
Is it the stove? Is it the water? Or has the literal fabric of our time sped up?
Oh, wow. I mean, it sounds totally absurd on its face, right? But that is kind of the brilliance of it.
Exactly.
Because it takes this massive, overwhelming, and, totally abstract cosmic dread. We all feel this sensation that time is just slipping through our fingers at an unnatural velocity.
Yeah, that constant anxiety.
Right. And it forces it into this highly localized 3-minute physical ritual right there in your kitchen. It really demands that you confront the friction between the clock on your wall and, well, the clock in your head.
I just found myself immediately obsessed with this image. Because, usually when we complain about time moving too fast, it's just this tired cliche.
Oh, for sure. Like, where did the summer go?
Exactly. We say, where did the summer go? And we just brush it off. But when you put a physical stopwatch to a predictable chemical process, like the coagulation of an egg, and the timeline literally bends, it forces a pretty terrifying question about the reality we actually inhabit.
It really does. And that is such a perfect launching point for the material we are diving into today.
It is. So let's get into it. Today we are exploring a remarkably dense, wide-ranging conversation from a Dutch YouTube channel called De Nieuwe Wereld.
Which translates to the new world, right?
Right. Yes, exactly. And the interview is with Ernst Jansz, who's now 77 years old. He's best known as the founder of the legendary 1980s Dutch pop band called Doe Maar.
And, to really understand the weight of his observations, we have to look at his unique vantage point in history. Because he isn't just some musician reminiscing about the good old days.
All right, there's so much more to him.
Yeah, he was born in 1948, right in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. So he grew up in this rebuilding world that felt like it possessed this infinite, open horizon of possibilities.
The post-war boom kind of feel.
Exactly. And then he becomes this massive stratospheric cultural icon in the 1980s, which, as we know, was an era defined by intense economic friction and Cold War paranoia.
Very different vibe.
Totally. And now, nearing 80, he is looking back at our hyper-digitized, deeply anxious, algorithm-driven present. So he is analyzing our modern dystopia with this incredibly hybrid perspective.
Yeah, because he has the soul of a poet, right? But he also formally studied biology.
He did. So he brings this piercing systemic analysis to human behavior. It's a really rare combination.
It is. So let's actually start with that 1980s cultural explosion, because the phenomenon of his band, Doe Maar, really sets the psychological baseline for everything he argues later on in the interview.
It absolutely does.
Even if you, the listener, have never heard a single word of Dutch in your entire life, the way Jansz talks about their success is basically a masterclass in the mechanics of cultural preservation.
Oh, without a doubt.
They achieved this staggering, Beatles-level hysteria in the Netherlands. And when he's asked why it resonated so profoundly and enduringly, Jansz points to a very specific, deliberate choice. They completely refused to sing in English.
Right. They sang exclusively in accessible, everyday Dutch.
Which was a massive deal.
It was a deeply subversive act at the time. I mean, you have to remember the landscape of the global music industry back then, especially in Europe. English was the undisputed language of commerce and cosmopolitan success.
You wanted to make money, you sang in English.
Exactly. If you wanted to break out, if you wanted to be perceived as modern or relevant, you adopted the Anglo-American linguistic hegemony.
Right.
By choosing Dutch, they were actively rejecting that homogenizing force of global pop culture. They weren't trying to sell records in America, They were holding up a mirror to the localized, immediate reality of their own audience.
They prioritized intimacy over scale. And the result of that intimacy was just a tidal wave of fan mail. Jansz talks about receiving literal mountains of letters.
I can't even imagine.
Right. And he felt this heavy, almost burdensome moral obligation to read them all. And while he's reading them, he noticed a stark repeating pattern.
What was it?
A massive portion of this mail was coming from very young girls who were just drowning in domestic instability.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were writing about their parents' bitter divorces, about alcoholic or absent fathers,
Mm.
about completely fractured home lives.
So I wasn't just fangirling.
Not at all. They weren't writing to tell him he was a heartthrob. They were writing to tell him that his music was literally the only emotional anchor holding their lives together.
That is so heavy. They were seeking a surrogate structure from the band.
Exactly.
And what makes that so compelling is the contrast between that intimate suffering inside those homes and the macro-level terror that was dominating the news cycle at the time.
Right, the early 1980s.
Yeah, people were suffocating under the dread of the Cold War. The threat of total nuclear annihilation wasn't some fringe conspiracy. It was the accepted geopolitical reality.
The bomb could drop at any minute.
Precisely. And in the middle of all this, Doe Maar releases what becomes their most iconic track, a song called Da Bomb the Bomb.
Which everyone knows.
Right. For 40 years, the public universally interpreted this as the ultimate Cold War protest anthem, a song about the world ending in a flash of nuclear fire.
And here is the crazy twist. The true origin of that song, as Jansz reveals in this interview, is entirely different, and it completely reframes how we should view our own modern anxieties.
This part blew my mind.
Same. He explicitly states that Da Bomb was never really about the Soviet Union or nuclear weapons.
Wait, really? What was it about?
It was a critique of the annihilation of the individual by the schedule.
Wow. By the schedule.
Yes. He was watching society become hyper-fixated on productivity, where human beings were just sprinting from one calendar appointment to the next, entirely consumed by the mechanics of their own day.
So he was observing the early stages of our current burnout culture.
Exactly. He posits this brilliant, quiet tragedy. He says, if the literal bomb drops tomorrow and you find yourself trapped under the rubble next to someone, do you even know who that person is?
Oh, that's dark, but so true.
Right. Have you spent your entire existence rushing past your spouse, your children, your friends, just in pursuit of calendar efficiency, to the point where you don't even know the people you share a life with?
Or yourself, for that matter.
Exactly. Have you completely missed the opportunity to know yourself? So he effectively hijacked the biggest, loudest, most paralyzing fear of the 1980s nuclear holocaust and used it as a Trojan horse.
To deliver a warning about the quiet, invisible violence of being busy.
Yes. He's arguing that we obsess over these massive external apocalyptic scenarios while willingly letting our own personal internal worlds end every single day through hyper-scheduling.
That is profound, and this micro-level anxiety actually maps perfectly onto the macro-level shift we experience today.
How so?
Well, think about the stark contrast between the 1980s and our current decade. The 1980s in Europe featured youth unemployment rates hovering around 25%.
That is massive.
It was. The economic outlook was grim, the geopolitical threat was existential, it was objectively a bleak time. Yet Jansz reflects on that specific period as an era of immense organic freedom.
Interesting. Because of the lack of structure.
Exactly. The days possessed this natural, unforced flow. People lingered in cafes. They had unstructured conversations on the street. The external threat of the bomb was massive, sure, but the internal life of the human being was still vast and unoccupied.
And today?
Today, that dynamic has violently inverted.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Because the macro world today, while chaotic, is mostly mediated to us through screens.
Right. We watch it happen from afar.
The physical threat of the sky falling has receded for many of us. But the micro world, our personal daily existence, is under absolute siege.
It really is. We don't fear a nuclear winter anymore. We fear a double-booked Tuesday.
Yes, the calendar itself has become the weapon of mutually assured destruction.
That is a great way to put it. And that pervasive, suffocating structure is the direct catalyst for the physical distortion of time that Jansz talks about next.
Getting back to the egg.
Right. Because when your internal world is relentlessly bombarded by scheduled obligations, the neurological perception of time fundamentally fractures.
This brings us back to his observation about the generations. He compares his own lived experience at age 30 to the lives of his children, who are currently in their 30s.
And the contrast is huge.
It's night and day. He says if you'd approached him at 30 and asked, is time moving too fast? The question wouldn't have even made sense to him.
Because he wasn't feeling that pressure.
Exactly. He felt an absolute abundance of time. He was writing hit songs, playing 4 concerts a week, and yet he still possessed the temporal bandwidth to meticulously repair his own roof.
I love that detail.
He was logging daily observations of local bird populations, organizing a stamp collection, and just sitting in silence.
He was living a multidimensional life, entirely free from the sensation of scarcity. He wasn't rushing.
Right. But now, he asks his 30-year-old children that exact same question, and their response is visceral panic.
They feel like they're strapped to a rocket.
Yes, the velocity of their days is completely overwhelming them, and that is when he shares the anecdote about the boiled egg.
The famous egg. Let's dig into that.
So, because he grew up in the austere post-war years, a simple egg was a profound luxury to him. So he developed an incredibly precise standard for how it should be prepared.
He takes his eggs very seriously.
Very. He uses the exact same vintage pot, the same heat source, the exact same volume of water. Decades ago, perfection took 3 minutes.
Okay.
Today, the identical physical process takes over 4 minutes.
And he jokingly blames Klaus Valk for this, right?
Yeah, Klaus Valk, which is like the Dutch folklore equivalent of the Sandman, he suggests some invisible entity is literally turning the gears of the universe faster.
Right. But beneath the folklore is a severe critique of cognitive load and temporal psychology.
Okay, but let's pause here and genuinely question the mechanics of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, is he just describing the basic biological reality of aging?
How do you mean?
Well, we all know that when you are 10 years old, a single year represents 10% of your entire existence, so it feels like an eternity.
Right, the fraction theory of time.
Exactly. But when you are 50, a year is just 2% of your life, so it passes in a blur. So is he just mistaking a well-documented biological illusion for a societal crisis?
It's a fair question to ask.
Or did the specific environment of the 1980s, specifically the lack of constant vibrating connectivity, allow for the existence of something critical that we have entirely eradicated?
Boredom.
Yes, profound boredom. Did the state of boredom literally stretch the fabric of perceived time?
You are hitting on the exact neurological mechanism at play here. It isn't merely the mathematical fraction of an aging life. It is about how the human brain encodes memory and processes input.
Break that down for us.
Okay, so when Jansz was 30 and spent an entire afternoon repairing a roof or watching a specific species of bird, he was engaged in a continuous, unbroken state of singular attention.
Right, he was just doing one thing.
Exactly. And when the brain sustains focus on a single narrative track without interruption, it encodes that period as a dense, rich, elongated duration of time. The memory is deep, so the time feels fast.
Like a solid block of experience.
Precisely. Now contrast that with the neurological reality of a 30-year-old today. Their waking existence is dictated by violent, high-frequency context switching.
Oh man, the context switching is brutal.
It is. A Slack message demands attention for 12 seconds. A calendar alert fires off. They doom scroll social media for 4 minutes, consuming 30 distinct, unrelated micro-narratives.
A tragedy, a comedy, an advertisement, a political outrage.
Exactly, all back to back. Then they answer an email. The brain never settles into a continuous groove. Because the inputs are so fragmented and shallow, the brain struggles to encode deep memories of the day.
So what happens to the perception of time?
Well, when you look back at a day filled with 1,000 micro-distractions, the brain essentially compresses the file, it discards the fragments, and the day feels like it vanished in an instant.
Wow.
The psychological acceleration is real.
Wow.
We haven't just lost time, we have destroyed the cognitive environment required to perceive it slowly.
We have literally eradicated the empty space where time used to pool and
Yes.
settle. And that is exactly why his egg metaphor is so devastatingly effective. We can debate memory encoding and context switching in the abstract all day long, but he forces the issue into the physical realm.
Right, it grounds the theory.
He is demanding that we look for the physical friction points in our own life. What ritual exposes the lie of our accelerated reality?
That's the question for the listener, really. What physical task proves to you that your internal clock is racing ahead of the physical universe?
Right. Think about it. What is your boiled egg?
It could be the unbearable impatience of waiting for a microwave to count down from 30 seconds.
Oh, I hate that.
Or it could be the sensation that a familiar 10-minute commute suddenly feels agonizingly long because you aren't listening to a podcast at 1.5 speed.
Guilty as charged.
Right. Jansz is asking you to locate the exact physical moment where you realize your brain is operating at a hyper-frenetic pace that the physical world simply cannot match.
And if you acknowledge that your perception of reality has been fundamentally warped by this digital acceleration, it opens a very dark philosophical door.
The darkest.
If the pacing of our reality is artificial, is anything around us actually real?
Right.
Jansz explores this by introducing a classic thought experiment, grounded in a story about a friend who built an elaborate terrarium for an ant colony.
It is a staple of philosophical discourse, but the way he applies it to our current technological crisis is just razor sharp.
So he describes watching these ants live their entire existence within the confines of this glass box. They establish complex hierarchies, they construct intricate tunnels, they meticulously forage for the food provided to them.
And they act with total certainty that they are interacting with the entirety of the cosmos.
Exactly. They are blissfully biologically incapable of comprehending that their universe is merely a highly controlled artificial environment sitting in some human being's living room.
It's the only world they know.
Right. And Jansz looks away from the glass box, looks at our modern, screen-mediated society, and asks the terrifying question.
Are we the ants?
Are we the ants? Have we built our own terrarium, and are we now entirely oblivious to the artificial boundaries containing us?
And this fear of the simulated reality, it has really moved from the realm of dorm room philosophy into an immediate practical crisis. And that is largely driven by the explosive capabilities of artificial intelligence.
Oh, absolutely.
Jansz didn't arrive at the ant terrarium metaphor through abstract reading.
Yeah.
He arrived there through a deeply jarring personal confrontation with a machine.
Yes, and this is where the implications get truly staggering. He tells this story about sitting casually by a campfire with his son.
Right.
His son asks him for some lyrics, so Jansz hands over the lyrics to an old, deeply personal song he'd written.
Okay.
His son then asks him what style of music he enjoys, and Jansz mentions his love for the raw, energetic punk pop sound of the early 80s band Blondie.
A classic sound.
Right. So his son takes out his phone, feeds Jansz's intimate lyrics into an AI music generator, and prompts it to create a track in the exact style of prime-era Blondie.
And we have to be very clear about what the output was here. This wasn't some clunky, robotic text-to-speech novelty from 5 years ago.
No, not at all. It was a masterpiece of mimicry. Within moments, the machine produces a fully realized track.
Wow.
Jansz sits by the fire, listening to his own deeply human words being belted out by a synthetic voice that sounds undeniably real. Yeah. He admits he was utterly staggered.
I bet.
The chord progressions were complex and perfect. The melodic hooks were infectious. The vocal intonation contained the exact swagger and emotional grit you would expect from Debbie Harry.
It was musically, aesthetically, and emotionally competent.
Highly competent.
And that competence forces Jansz to recognize a chilling threshold that humanity has just crossed. He points out that right now, this specific moment in time marks a permanent rupture in human history.
How so?
Well, for tens of thousands of years, if you heard a rhythm, a melody, or a sum word, you possessed the absolute biological certainty that another human being was generating it.
Right. You knew a person made that sound.
But today, when a song plays on the radio or filters through a Spotify playlist, that certainty is dead. We can no longer definitively separate human emotional expression from algorithmic pattern generation.
That is so unsettling. He even goes so far as to predict that within the near future, we will see newly generated classical compositions like symphonies in the precise mathematical and emotional style of Chopin or Bach flooding the market.
Oh, inevitably.
And the most trained classical ears will be completely unable to distinguish the machine from the master.
Which forces a massive philosophical reckoning.
Okay, wait. I struggle with this whole concept, and I kind of want to push back on Jansz's horror here.
Go for it.
Because he admits that after the initial shock, he found the AI Blondie song strangely amusing. But I find myself genuinely asking, if the AI Blondie song makes me feel the exact same involuntary joy, if an AI Chopin piece moves me to actual tears, why does the origin even matter?
Okay, I see where you're going.
Right. If the end result, the emotional resonance inside my own body, is identical, isn't the origin irrelevant? Why do we care if the chef is a human or a robot if the meal tastes transcendent? Doesn't fighting against the AI just make us sound like grumpy purists?
That's a strong argument. You are arguing for the utility of the emotion, which is a fair point.
Yeah.
But you are missing the existential injury that Jansz is pointing out.
Existential injury.
Yes. It is about a catastrophic crisis of human humility. Think about the historical shift in the ego of our species.
Okay, follow the ego.
In the 1980s, despite the looming threat of nuclear war, human beings still firmly believed we sat at the absolute apex of the pyramid.
Right, we were the top dogs.
We were the undisputed architects of reality. We were the only entities capable of profound creativity, complex problem-solving, and emotional synthesis. We were the ones building the terrariums. We were not the subjects living inside them.
So our entire identity was predicated on our intellectual and creative supremacy.
Exactly. But Jansz recognizes that by 2030, or perhaps even tomorrow morning, we will be forced to share this planet with entities that are demonstrably more intelligent, faster, and exponentially more synthetically creative than the most brilliant human mind.
That's a scary thought.
If we outsource our logistical thinking to algorithms, and we outsource our emotional expression to generative audio models, what is the unique value proposition of being a human being?
Wow.
If a server farm can write a more heartbreaking love song than you can, who are you? We are facing the sudden, violent demotion of the human species from the center of the universe to a secondary role.
We are experiencing a species-wide identity crisis. If we aren't the smartest and we aren't the most creative, then what is the point of us?
Exactly the question.
But this is the pivot point in Jansz's philosophy, where he actually shifts away from fatalism and discovers a deeply compelling counter-strategy.
What's the strategy?
He argues that if the digital realm is becoming infinitely capable of faking perfection, our response must not be to enter an arms race with the algorithm.
Right, you can't win that.
Exactly. You cannot outcompute a machine. You cannot be more flawless than a line of code. Therefore, we must violently pivot toward the one thing the machine fundamentally cannot possess.
He calls for an embrace of the physical, the localized, and the inherently flawed.
I call it the acoustic antidote.
I like that.
Jansz predicts a massive cultural whiplash effect. Because everything in the digital sphere is becoming synthetic, frictionless, and fake, human beings are going to develop a desperate biological starvation for unpolished reality.
Makes perfect sense.
He foresees people abandoning their pristine Spotify algorithms to crowd into damp, poorly lit local pubs, simply to watch a living, breathing person strum an acoustic guitar.
And the most crucial element of this prediction is his insistence on the value of imperfection.
Yes, the flaw is the point.
The acoustic music in that pub might be objectively inferior to the AI generation. The singer might struggle to hit a high note, the guitar might fall slightly out of tune due to the humidity in the room, the tempo might drag.
But Jansz argues that those flaws are no longer detriments. They are the cryptographic signatures of humanity.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it.
In a world of synthetic perfection, the missed note is the absolute proof of life. The flaw is what makes it valuable.
It is the authenticity of the struggle. A machine does not struggle to generate a chord. It simply executes. A human being sweats, strains, and risks failure in real time.
Right.
And Jansz points out that when we gather to witness that human struggle, something biological happens.
What happens?
Making live music forces a room full of disparate individuals to literally breathe together. The musicians and the audience synchronize. They form a singular, temporary organism with a shared, overlapping heartbeat.
An AI algorithm can render a mathematically flawless audio file, but it does not have lungs.
Exactly. It cannot share the physical atmosphere of a room. It has no skin in the game. It cannot participate in the friction of physical space.
It's disembodied.
Right. And to cement this concept of innate, physical human synchronization, Jansz shares what might be the most visually arresting story of the entire interview. He describes a trip to Jakarta, Indonesia.
Oh, this image completely rewired how I think about crowds.
Same.
He was standing on a street corner in Jakarta, observing the traffic. He describes watching an intersection where something like 100,000 scooters and mopeds are all weaving through each other simultaneously.
It's utter mayhem.
To the rigid, structured Western eye, it looks like absolute terrifying chaos.
Yeah.
There are no clear lanes, no orderly single-file lines. It is just a massive, roaring river of metal, exhaust, and humanity hurtling forward with vehicles missing each other by fractions of an inch.
A system that appears on the verge of catastrophic collapse at any second.
But as he stands there and truly observes the flow, he realizes a miraculous truth. There is no collapse.
None.
There are no crashes. No one is colliding. There is not a single scratch of metal on metal. He suddenly understands that what he is witnessing is not chaos. It is a profound, deeply embedded human harmony.
That's incredible.
He compares the drivers to a murmuration of starlings swooping through the sky in perfect unison, or a massive school of fish turning on a dime in the deep ocean to evade a predator. These 100,000 independent human beings were all tuning into an invisible, instinctual frequency.
He is describing the biological phenomenon of collective synchronization. It relies on mirror neurons, peripheral awareness, and a total surrender to the immediate physical environment.
It's beautiful, really.
It is. And what is so powerful about this metaphor is how he connects the exhaust-choked streets of Jakarta directly back to the acoustic pub and the experience of human intimacy.
Right.
In all of these scenarios, humans are bypassing their analytical brains and tapping into a deeply primal spiritual synchronization.
We possess this dormant superpower of collective harmony. We are entirely capable of moving as a single, perfectly synced organism, but we only access that superpower under highly specific physical conditions.
When the stakes are real.
Yes. We unlock it when we are risking failure on a stage together. We unlock it when we are navigating the lethal immediate physics of an Indonesian intersection. And as he beautifully points out, we unlock it when we fall in love.
Oh, wow.
When you are deeply in love, you don't calculate your conversation. You naturally anticipate the other person's thoughts. You finish their sentences. You are completely synced to their rhythm.
That synchronization is the definitive defense against the AI terrarium. The generative model can simulate the output of love or the output of music, but it cannot participate in the physical murmuration.
It can't feel the flow.
It does not navigate a body through a crowded street. Jansz is proposing a radical shift in how we value ourselves. Moving forward, human worth will no longer be measured by raw intelligence, data processing, or flawless productive output.
Because the machines win that game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our supreme value will be our capacity to be in localized, physical, vulnerable harmony with one another.
We have to stop trying to be the most efficient calculators in the room and start remembering how to be a flock of birds.
What a stunning, poetic vision of human potential.
It really is.
Yeah.
But Jansz doesn't just offer poetry. He offers a harsh critique of why we've forgotten how to fly in the first place. He points the finger directly at the rigid, hubristic nature of our modern institutions.
Reserving his sharpest criticism for the institution of science, right?
Yes, which requires a little bit of context, because Jansz is emphatically not anti-science.
Right. We mentioned he studied biology.
Exactly. He spent 3 years at the university level engaged in the rigorous formal study of biology. He understands the mechanics of the scientific method. But it is precisely because of that deep study that he views the natural world as an ongoing, profound magic trick.
He still sees the wonder in it.
He does. He looks at the biological machinery of a horse and marvels at the sheer absurdity of it. I mean, this massive muscular creature generates immense physical power, pure explosive horsepower, simply by consuming grass.
It is pretty wild when you strip it down like that.
Right. He looks at the alchemy of botany. He describes seeing 3 distinct flowers growing side by side in the exact same patch of dirt. Yet, through some miraculous internal mechanism, one flower extracts the precise compounds needed to turn a vibrant blue. The second pulls out different compounds to become bright yellow, and the third becomes red.
They're constructing entirely different realities from the exact same soil.
Yes. He looks at the precise, razor-thin margins of Earth's parameters, the specific gravitational pull, the exact distance from the sun required to maintain liquid water, and he sees an undeniable, staggering miracle.
But this awe is exactly where his critique begins.
Exactly. He describes what he calls the tragedy of science. He argues that all scientific endeavor begins with this pure, beautiful, almost childlike curiosity about the magic of the universe.
The initial spark.
Right. But the tragedy occurs the moment science actually finds an answer, because the moment it solves a mystery, the institution tends to take that phenomenon, fold it up, and stuff it into a metaphorical drawer.
Right. The living, breathing process of discovery is instantly rigidified into static dogma.
It just becomes fact.
They write the definitive answer in a textbook, close the cover, and establish an intellectual culture that demands no one ever question that specific drawer again. The institution claims dominion over the mystery, and in doing so, the sense of wonder is systematically assassinated.
And he backs up this philosophical critique with an incredibly specific, deeply frustrating personal anecdote.
Let's hear it.
So Jansz is a passionate birdwatcher, and he regularly logs his observations on a major Dutch nature tracking database. One day, in the dead heat of August, he spots a very specific rare bird, a rough-legged buzzard known in Dutch as a roodpoot buzzard.
Okay, a rare bird in August.
He clearly identifies it and logs the data into the system. A few days later, he checks his account and discovers that the site administrators, the institutional experts, have actively gone into his personal file and altered his data.
They changed his entry.
Yes, they erased his rough-leg buzzard and downgraded it to a standard common buzzard.
And their justification for altering his lived experience is the absolute core of his argument regarding institutional blindness.
It is. He contacts them, and they tell him that according to the established scientific literature, the textbooks explicitly state that rough-legged buzzards only migrate to the Netherlands during the winter months.
So they told him he was wrong based on the calendar.
Exactly. Because the calendar said August, his observation was deemed scientifically impossible. Jansz argues back. He says, look around. The climate is rapidly changing. Ecosystems are in chaos. Animal migration patterns are drastically shifting everywhere. I am a trained biologist, and I know exactly what I saw with my own eyes.
Did they listen?
Nope. The administrators categorically refused to accept a real-world physical observation because it defied the parameters of their historical rulebook.
That is the absolute pinnacle of institutional hubris. When the credentialed class believe they have comprehensively mapped a domain of knowledge, they literally stop observing reality.
They close their eyes.
They become more fiercely loyal to their historical data models than to the living, mutating world unfolding right in front of them.
It's like driving a car and having your GPS aggressively insist that you turn right. You look out the windshield, and you see that turning right will plunge you directly into a deep lake.
But the computer says turn right.
Exactly. But the institution demands you trust the programmed map over the reality of the windshield. The birdwatchers were so completely devoted to the map of their textbooks that they willingly drowned the reality of the August buzzard.
What a powerful analogy.
Jansz is warning us that when we prioritize the security of the rulebook over the messiness of reality, we inflict a profound blindness upon ourselves. We mandate our own ignorance.
And this arrogant adherence to the rulebook isn't just an annoyance for amateur ornithologists. Jansz argues that this exact same strain of intellectual hubris, this desperate, arrogant clinging to institutional authority, has the power to deeply and dangerously fracture society when a true crisis hits.
Right. Now, before we explore how Jansz applies this theory to recent history, I need to make something crystal clear for everyone listening. We are about to unpack Jansz's deeply personal, highly philosophical observations regarding human behavior, compliance, and fear during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Very important disclaimer here.
Yes, we are exploring his psychological diagnosis of the cultural reaction. We are not evaluating the medical science, the efficacy of the interventions, or endorsing specific political stances on the pandemic policies.
Right, we are just imparting his views on human behavior.
Exactly. Our sole focus is on Jansz's argument about the fragility of independent thought in the face of collective panic.
With that framework established, we must start where Jansz starts his analysis, in a place of undeniable, horrific suffering.
Right.
He grounds his entire philosophy of human resilience in the story of his own father. During the brutal occupation of the Second World War, his father was arrested and thrown into a death cell.
A literal death cell.
Yes. He spent a month in that cell, waiting for the executioner, staring absolute, unavoidable death in the face. And while entombed in that nightmare, his father wrote a staggering reflection.
What did he write?
He wrote, "Lord, make humanity see the meaning of suffering. Our suffering is necessary to become happy."
It is almost incomprehensible to achieve that level of spiritual clarity while sitting in a death cell.
It truly is. And Jansz pairs his father's revelation with the profound writings of Etty Hillesum. She was a Dutch Jewish author who meticulously chronicled her own journey toward the Holocaust in her diaries.
Right. She's an incredibly important historical figure.
Hillesum argued that Western civilization has fundamentally forgotten the art of suffering. We view discomfort as a glitch to be eradicated. We attempt to constantly medicate it away, walk around it, or legislate it out of existence.
We run from it.
We have completely lost the spiritual capacity to sit with pain, endure uncertainty, and forge meaning in the crucible of discomfort.
And Jansz takes this historical lens, this assertion that an inability to suffer breeds deep psychological fragility, and he aims it directly at the societal reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
He expresses a profound, lingering shock bordering on betrayal at the behavior of his own social circle. He watched his highly educated friends, the cultural elite, the artists, the intellectuals, immediately and unquestionably comply with mandates such as widespread masking and relentless PCR testing that he personally found absurd and draconian.
He was baffled by how quickly the minds he respected most completely folded.
Completely folded, and he attempts to aggressively diagnose why the intellectual class collapsed so quickly. He isolates two primary mechanisms of control.
What's the first one?
The first is the sheer overwhelming volume of industrialized fear. He points to the constant, unavoidable media drumbeat, the hourly localized updates on infection rates, the scrolling death tolls on every screen, creating this omnipresent atmosphere of apocalyptic dread.
A weaponized narrative of terror that just short-circuits rational risk assessment?
Exactly. But the second, far more insidious factor he identifies is a specific vulnerability built into the modern intellectual ego.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
He argues that the highly educated class complied so completely because they simply had too much to lose.
They had status to protect.
They were utterly terrified of the social and economic suffering that would result from dissent. They feared losing their prestigious university tenure, their comfortable media perches, their lucrative gallery representation, and their societal status as the good, responsible citizens.
To explain this cowardice, he explicitly invokes the work of political philosopher Hannah Arendt, specifically her analysis in The Origins of Totalitarianism.
Which is a heavy reference.
It is. Arendt wrote extensively about how propaganda successfully mobilizes atomized masses and how societal control is truly achieved not just by force, but by the willing capitulation of the elite.
The intellectuals have to buy in.
Exactly. Jansz highlights a devastating, tragic irony rooted in Arendt's theories. The creative class, the exact demographic of musicians, writers, and subversive artists who historically built their entire cultural identities on questioning authority, writing protest anthems, and challenging the state apparatus, remained almost entirely silent during the pandemic.
They just vanished.
They abandoned their historical role as the societal immune system, trading their voices for the safety of compliance so they wouldn't lose their ability to perform.
It raises a deeply uncomfortable question regarding the relationship between intellect, status, and independent thought. Jansz is pointing to a recurring historical pattern where the comfortable intellectuals and the affluent silent majority are precisely the first to abandon critical reasoning when subjected to engineered collective fear.
Right, because they want to stay comfortable.
We operate under the assumption that a PhD, a massive vocabulary, or a deep knowledge of history acts as a shield against propaganda. But Jansz argues the exact opposite.
He suggests those credentials might actually be the chains.
Yes. Those credentials are the very chains that bind you to the propaganda, because your entire identity and livelihood are dependent on the institutions generating the fear. The intellectual is too afraid of the suffering that comes with ostracization to actually stand up and question the narrative.
It is a brutal critique. He is essentially asking, does your prestigious white-collar life actually make you vastly more susceptible to herd mentality simply because you have forgotten how to endure the discomfort of standing alone?
And if we pull back and look at the vast, complex panorama Jansz has painted for us, the cumulative weight is staggering.
It really is heavy.
He has outlined a world dictated by the hubris of blind institutions, a society so terrified of suffering that it will eagerly comply with its own silencing, an impending tsunami of artificial intelligence that threatens to rip away the very soul of human creativity, and the relentless, accelerating ticking of a clock that refuses to let us catch our breath.
When you confront the aggregate total of these forces, the most rational, logical response would be absolute paralyzing despair. You would just assume the terrarium is shattered and give up.
You would just lie on the floor.
Yeah, pretty much.
But this is where the genius of Ernst Jansz truly shines. He does not surrender to the bleakness of his own analysis. The final triumphant turn of this entire philosophical journey focuses on how he deliberately, fiercely constructs a counterweight to the madness.
This is the uplifting part.
It is. When the interviewer finally asks him, where on earth do you find comfort in a world like this? He doesn't point to a political movement or a technological fix. He points out his window.
He points to the trees.
He points to the trees.
He returns to the profound magic of biology. He talks about the relatively recent scientific confirmations regarding mycorrhizal networks.
The fungal webs.
Exactly. These incredibly complex, vast, underground fungal webs that connect the root systems of forests. We now possess empirical proof that trees are not solitary, selfish entities locked in a brutal Darwinian war for sunlight.
They aren't just fighting each other.
No, they are an ancient cooperative society. They use these underground networks to actively communicate. They share carbon, they shuttle water to trees that are struggling in the shade. They literally pump nutrients into the root systems of their young saplings.
It is a biological refutation of the idea that nature is only red in tooth and claw.
Right. He sees in the forest the exact same profound cooperative harmony that he witnessed in the scooter traffic of Jakarta or in the synchronization of a live band. The foundation of life is cooperative.
And he internalizes that natural cooperation and injects it directly into his role as an artist. During the most suffocating, isolating periods of the pandemic lockdowns, when he felt the cultural elite had cowardly gone silent, and when he himself felt paralyzed, unable to find the vocabulary to write a protest song about the current moment, he refused to just stop creating.
He didn't give up.
No. Instead of fighting the immediate darkness, he dug down into the roots. He looked backward for a foundation of resilience. He poured his energy into writing a book and recording an accompanying album titled Leaf to Sleed.
Which translates simply to love song.
Right. But this wasn't just a collection of disposable pop ballads. He focused the entire project on the deepest, most enduring connection he knew. The epic, harrowing love story of his own parents.
Oh, wow.
He documented how their romance not only survived but actively defied the horrific, suffocating darkness of the Second World War and the brutal, chaotic aftermath of the Indonesian War for Independence. He used his art to prove that human intimacy can endure the ultimate societal collapse.
Yet, even in the act of creating this beautiful tribute, he wrestles with a profound, agonizing sense of survivor's guilt.
He does. He possesses a deep self-awareness. He openly questions his own moral right to exist in such comfort.
Right.
He asks the ultimate question of the privileged artist. How can I possibly justify sitting here in my heavily insulated, cozy recording studio, drinking clean, warm tap water, and leisurely strumming a guitar when I know for an absolute fact that at this very second, people on the other side of the globe are inflicting unspeakable barbaric horrors upon each other?
It is a question that haunts anyone trying to live a good life in a broken world. Does the act of creating beauty in the face of global tragedy mean you are just cowardly ignoring the tragedy? Are you just playing the fiddle while Rome burns?
And Jansz arrives at a resolution that serves as the defining philosophy of his life. He humbly admits that he does not possess the grand cosmic answers. He doesn't know the ultimate meaning of the universe.
Right, he's not claiming to be a prophet.
But he confesses to feeling a deep, visceral, and perhaps admittedly selfish biological imperative to provide a counterweight to the sheer volume of misery in the world. He says in this incredibly quiet, powerful way that he feels compelled to put the sweet against the sour.
The sweet against the sour. It is a brilliant, necessary reframing of the artist's duty.
I cannot emphasize enough how much I love this philosophy. He's entirely rejecting the premise that creating beauty is an act of passive escapism. He is arguing that writing a love song or planting a garden or playing a slightly out-of-tune guitar in a crowded pub is an act of aggressive, vital rebellion.
Yes, active rebellion.
When the universe, or the algorithms, or the political systems are relentlessly flooding your life with sour, acidic darkness, he is saying, I do not have the power to stop the acid, but my absolute duty as a human being is to manufacture the sugar.
And that right there is the ultimate unifying resolution to every single anxiety he raised during the interview.
How so?
Think about it. How do you fight the existential dread of the AI terrarium? How do you combat the arrogant blindness of institutional science? How do you resist the cowardly compliance of a fearful society?
You don't fight them directly.
Exactly. You don't do it by endlessly, bitterly debating these forces in the comment sections of the internet. You don't defeat the machine by trying to build a slightly faster microchip.
Right.
You defeat it by planting a tree in your yard. You defeat it by researching the love story of your ancestors. You defeat it by stubbornly, fiercely defending the beautiful, vulnerable, inherently flawed, acoustic reality of human physical connection.
You defeat the terrarium by proving that you are capable of generating uncalculated, irrational sweetness.
Beautifully said.
What an absolutely staggering intellectual and emotional arc we have traveled today. We started by examining the localized cultural phenomenon of a Dutch pop band singing in their native tongue.
We covered so much ground.
We really did. We explored the terrifying neurological mystery of why it takes 4 minutes to boil a 3-minute egg. We waded through the existential horror of outsourcing our emotional expression to algorithms. We challenged the arrogant textbooks that demand we ignore the birds flying right in front of our faces.
And we confronted the deeply uncomfortable truth about how easily our credentials become tools of our own compliance.
And yet, after descending into all of that darkness, we emerged into the most defiant, hopeful place possible. The realization that simply writing a love song in a world addicted to fear is a profound act of rebellion.
It serves as a necessary grounding reminder. The macro forces dominating our era, the staggering acceleration of artificial intelligence, the monolithic power of global institutions, the engineered algorithms dictating our schedules, they are undeniably massive and intimidating.
Terrifying, really.
But Jansz proves that the micro actions of authentic human connection, the localized friction of our shared physical reality, remain infinitely more powerful and resilient.
So, as we bring this deep dive to a close, my challenge to you, the listener, is to actively rebel today. Step away from the screens and go look for your own rough-legged buzzards.
Go find them?
Keep your eyes wide open for the strange, beautiful, undeniable realities right in front of you that the rigid rulebooks of modern life insist shouldn't exist. Seek out the magic that refuses to be neatly folded and stuffed into an institutional drawer.
And I want to leave you with one final lingering provocation to turn over in your mind long after the sound of our voices fades.
Let's hear it.
We spent a great deal of time discussing that AI model capable of generating a flawless, emotionally resonant Blondie song. Think deeply about the trajectory of that technology. If 5 years from now an algorithm generates a piece of music or writes a poem or paints a visual masterpiece that bypasses your intellect and genuinely brings you to tears.
A real visceral reaction.
Exactly. If a machine perfectly, flawlessly captures the absolute deepest, most complex architecture of your personal grief or your greatest joy, does the fact that it was generated by a cold, soulless server farm make your physical tears any less real?
Oh, that's heavy.
Or is the profound sweetness that the art injects into your specific life enough to make the experience ultimately undeniably human?
Wow. That is an incredibly profound, beautiful question to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on this expansive journey today. Do your nervous system a favor right now. Delete an appointment from your calendar, close the laptop, walk outside, and just go breathe the same air as the rest of the world for a little while. We will catch you next time.